It's the light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. It's the light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. It's the light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine.
네, 소망부 예배에 오신 우리 소망부 친구들, 부모님들, 교사 선생님들 모두 주님의 이름으로 축복합니다. 제가 기도하고 오늘의 소망부 예배도 시작하도록 하겠습니다. 기도하겠습니다. 하나님 감사합니다. 이렇게 이번 한 주도 주님 안에서 잘 살아내게 하시고 이겨내게 하시고 이렇게 주님 앞에 돌아와 예배하며 나아갈 수 있게 하시면 감사합니다. 하나님, 우리가 이렇게 주님 앞 한 주를 살아내고 주님 앞에 예배하며 나아가는 이 순간 가운데 하나님, 우리들 마음 가운데 지쳤던 마음 있고 힘들었던 마음 있다며 하나님, 오늘의 예배를 통해서 그 모든 어려운 마음들, 짐진 마음들 모두 내려놓게 하시고 하나님, 온전히 주님을 바라보며 주님께서 주시는 진정한 그 평온한 마음을 얻고 나아가는 시간이 될 수 있도록 하나님 함께 하시고 붙들어 주시옵소서. 하나님, 계속되는 코로나 가운데에서도 하나님 우리 모두의 건강을 지켜주시고 하나님 조금도 아프지 않게 하시고 정말 그 조금의 바이러스도 아픔도 우리 몸을 틈타지 못하도록 하나님께서 지켜주시고 날마다 함께하여 주시옵소서. 추운 날씨에 감기 걸리지 않게 하시고 날마다 건강히 나아가는 우리 소망부 친구들 될 수 있도록 하나님 함께 하시고 붙잡아 주시옵소서. 하나님, 오늘의 예배도 주님 앞에 드립니다. 오늘의 예배가 주님 앞에 드려지고 또 한 주를 살아갈 때 있어서 하나님, 우리를 날마다 새롭게 하시고 새로운 은혜를 더하시고 새로운 주님의 사랑을 더하셔서 하나님, 주님께서 주신 은혜와 사랑과 힘으로 이 세상을 이겨내 나아가는 우리 소망부 친구들, 우리 학부모님들, 우리 교사 선생님들 될 수 있도록 하나님 함께 하시고 붙잡아 주시옵소서. 하나님, 우리와 함께하여 주심을 믿습니다. 우리를 사랑하심을 믿습니다. 하나님 함께하여 주시고 앞으로의 모든 삶도 하나님 우리를 인도하여 주시옵소서. 이 모든 말씀 우리를 너무나도 사랑하시는 예수님의 이름으로 기도드렸습니다. 아멘.
아름다운 마음들이 모여서 주의 은혜 나누며 예수님을 따라 사랑해야지. 우리 서로 사랑해. 하나님이 가르쳐준 한 가지
Hello, everyone. Hope all of you had a very happy and safe and healthy week. Today, the sermon is on the book of 1 Samuel, which breaks down the literary design of the book, and it's full of thought. In 1 Samuel, God reluctantly raises up kings to rule the Israelites. The first is a failure, and the second, David, is a faithful replacement.
The books of 1st and 2nd Samuel. They're two separate books in our modern Bibles, but that division is due simply to scroll length. It was originally written as one coherent story. We're just going to cover the book of 1 Samuel in this video. So after Israel was rescued from slavery in Egypt, they made a covenant with God at Mount Sinai and eventually came into the Promised Land. And there, Israel was supposed to be faithful to God and obey the covenant commands. Before the book of Samuel, Judges showed how Israel failed at that task big time. It was a period of moral chaos, and it showed Israel's need for wise, faithful leaders. The book of Samuel provides an answer to that need. The book of Samuel's story focuses on three main characters: the prophet Samuel, where the book gets its name, and then King Saul, and after that, King David. And all three of them transitioned Israel from a group of tribes ruled by judges into a unified kingdom ruled by King David in Jerusalem. And the book of Samuel has a fascinating design that weaves the story of these three characters together in four main parts. Samuel, he's the key leader and prophet in the first section of the book, but then he also plays a key role in the next section, which is Saul's story, and it's told in two movements: Saul's rise to power and then his failures. And the second part is about his downfall and his tragic death. And then the drama of Saul's demise is matched by David's exciting rise to power. And then David's story is told in two movements. First, he rides the wave of his success, followed by his own tragic failure and the slow self-destruction of his family and then his kingdom. The book concludes with an epilogue that reflects back over the whole story. So let's dive in and see how this all unfolds. Part 1 picks up from the chaos of the book of Judges, and we're introduced to a touching story about a woman named Hannah. And she's grieved because she has never been able to have children. And by God's grace, she finally has a son named Samuel. And in joy, she sings this amazing poem in chapter 2. And the poem is all about how God opposes the proud and exalts the humble, about how despite tragedies and human evil, God is working out his purposes in history. And also it's about how God will one day raise up an anointed king for his people. Now, Hannah's poem has been placed here at the beginning of the book to introduce these key themes that we're going to see throughout the whole story, like the next one. Samuel grows up and becomes a great prophet and leader for the people of Israel, at the same time that the Philistines rise to power as Israel's arch nemesis. And in this crucial battle, the Israelites get arrogant, and instead of praying and asking God for help, they trot out the Ark of the Covenant as this kind of magic trophy that will automatically grant them victory in battle. And so because of their arrogant presumption, God allows Israel to lose the battle, and the Ark is stolen. So the Philistines, they take the ark and they place it in the temple of their god, Dagon. And then the God of Israel defeats the Philistines and the god Dagon without an army by sending plagues on the people. And then the Philistines don't want the ark anymore, obviously, and they send it back to Israel. And the point of this little story seems to be this: God is not Israel's trophy, and he opposes pride among the Philistines, but also among his own people. And so Israel needs to remain humble and obedient if they want to experience God's covenant blessing, which opens up into the next large section. The Israelites come to Samuel and they say, "Hey, we want a king like all the other nations have. Go find one for us." And so Samuel, he's kind of ticked off and he goes to consult with God. And God says, yes, their motives are all wrong, but if a king is what they want, give them one. And so we're introduced to the figure of Saul. Now, Saul is a tragic figure because he begins full of promise. He's tall, he's good-looking, he's a perfect candidate for a king. But he has deep character flaws. He's dishonest, he lacks integrity, and he seems incapable of acknowledging his own mistakes. And so these flaws become his downfall. He wins some battles at the beginning, but his flaws run so deep, he eventually disqualifies himself by blatantly disobeying God's commands. And so the aging Samuel confronts Saul and Israel. He had warned the people that they would only benefit from a king who's humble and faithful to God. Otherwise, the kings of Israel will bring ruin. So he informs Saul that God is going to raise up a new king to replace him. And so Saul's downfall begins, as God at the same time is working behind the scenes to raise up that new king. It's an insignificant shepherd boy named David. He's the least likely candidate to be king, but the famous story of David and Goliath shows that God's choice of David is not based on his family status, but simply on his radical and humble trust in the God of Israel. And so this story embodies all of the themes of Hannah's poem. Proud Saul and Goliath are brought low, while humble David is exalted. From here, we watch Saul slowly descend into madness, while David rises to power. So David starts working for Saul as a general, and he's winning all of the battles, and he's also winning all of the fame. And so Saul gets jealous, and he starts chasing David around, hunting him, trying to kill him. David's done nothing wrong, and so David simply runs and waits in the wilderness. And here we see David's true character. He has multiple opportunities to kill Saul, but he doesn't. He simply trusts that despite Saul's evil, God will raise up a king for his people. What's interesting, too, is that many of the poems of David that you find in the book of Psalms are linked to this very period of his life, and they all express the same attitude of trust. And so this section of the book ends with Saul coming to a grisly death after losing a battle with the Philistines. 1 Samuel tells some of the most intricate, well-told stories you find anywhere in the Bible, and the characters Saul and David, they're portrayed very realistically. And the author's putting them forward as character studies so that you can find yourself in them. So in Saul's story, we see a warning. It's crucial that we reflect on our own character flaws and how they harm us and other people. And with God's help, we need to humble ourselves and deal with our dark side so that Saul's story doesn't become ours. David, on the other hand, is presented as an example of patience and trust in God's timing in our lives. And so he's running in the wilderness, being chased by Saul. David had every reason to think that God had abandoned him, but that's not what he thinks. And so David's story encourages us to trust that despite human evil, God is working out his purposes to oppose the proud and to exalt the humble. And that's what 1 Samuel is all about.
Hey,
is the way, he's my everything. Every single moment of every single day, there's something deep within me, I just gotta say, 'cause I'm gonna praise you, Lord, every day of my life. 'Cause you give me freedom and it makes me shout, makes me get up and dance, get up and dance. Come on everybody, are you ready to sing? 'Cause Jesus is the way, he's my everything. 'Cause every single moment of every single day, there's something deep within me, I just gotta say, 'cause I'm gonna praise you, Lord, every day of my life. 'Cause you give me freedom and it makes me shout, it makes me get up and I'm gonna praise you, Lord, every day of my life. 'Cause you give me freedom and it makes me shout, makes me get up. So the boys in the room, put your hands like you're ready to go.
Hello! Hi guys! Today we're gonna learn what God's protection means for us. So I have this glass of water and I have 3 tangerines. So if you guys have tangerine at your place, or lemon, orange, lime, anything, you guys can do this activity after you watch this. So these 3 tangerines are best friend. He's Alvin, Brad, Chloe. So Alvin is a believer who he knows who God is. Brad, he knows who God is, but he does not believe in God. And Chloe, she's not a believer. She doesn't know who God is. And this water, let's think about this water as a word that we're living in. So Chloe, who doesn't know who God is, doesn't have God's protection. So let's think about this cover of the tangerine as God's protection. Because Chloe does not know God, she doesn't have God's protection over her life. So let's see. Can you guys see this? Without God's protection, Chloe is sinking to the bottom of this glass because she does not have any of God's protection. Now, Brad, as I said, he knows who God is, but he does not believe. So whenever he is having a hard time, he prays just time to time, but he's not a believer. But Brad has a little bit of God's protection here, and the rest of his body is without the cover. So let's see. So it looks like Brad is barely surviving. He was down here, but luckily because of a little bit of God's protection on top of his body, he's floating, but very it looks very hard, isn't it? So last, Alvin. As I said, Alvin is a believer. He knows who God is, and he confessed his faith that Jesus is a savior of his life. So let's see what happened to Alvin. Oh, Brad is sinking, by the way. So Alvin is up above the water with full of God's protection. He does not sink. And Chloe, as we all saw, that Chloe is still at the bottom of this glass. And Brad, he sometimes floating, but most of the time he was also sinking at the bottom of this glass. So today's lesson is whenever you guys pray, ask for God's protection. God is always giving us giving us His protection. So whenever you guys pray, pray for God's protection to you and to your family, your friends, and also to for Kumanggu's teacher. Okay? See you guys next week. Bye bye.
My friends, this is my blessings for you today. May the Lord bless you and keep you. Make His face shine upon you and be gracious to you. Turn His face towards you and give you peace. Amen.
수학무 친구들, 다음 주에 만나요.